Yogena chittasya padena vacha malam sharirasya cha vaidekena yopakrutam pravaram muninam Patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi. So we were discussing this 48th sutra of the Samadhipada. That we started. Ritambhara-Prajna Sudanumana-Prajnabhyam Annivishaya Vishesharthatvad. These are the two important sutras dealing with a very important topic in yoga tradition. It is called Ritambhara-Prajna. That's what it means. Prajna is higher spiritual intuition. So the Sanskrit word itself implies that prakashena jnayate iti prajna. When you are able to understand the deeper aspects of a subject that you cannot understand through logical analysis, through association with what you already know, that's what is called intuition. So intuition is some kind of an intellectual, at a higher level, a spiritual hotline to the reality of anything that you understand. So you can find this common in all great spiritual teachers. And also, even at the ordinary non-spiritual levels, you find when a person reaches a very high degree of perfection in any skill or knowledge, when he identifies himself with a language, with a subject, or with a skill area of specialization, he develops a unique ability to go deeper or into the deeper aspects of the particular area of specialization. It could happen in medicine for a great teacher, for a great medical scientist, for a doctor, an engineer, in any skill. I'm here not talking about spiritual teachers. Just to give an example, how it really happens. So the Sanskrit explanation of this prajna is Ritam avikalpidam satyamidi yavat tat vibharti prakasayiti iti Ritambhara. This is the simple translation as Vivekananda gives is the knowledge in that is called filled with truth. True insight into our own being. That is the ability to reach a level of awareness or consciousness beyond which there is nothing. So that kind of insight is a natural characteristic of a person who has reached this prajna, Ritambhara-Prajna. So one important aspect of this Ritambhara-Prajna is it is totally and completely freed from any kind of error. So whatever that we understand, as I mentioned in the last class, through logical analysis or through epistemological tools, that's what we are going to discuss in the next sutra. There is always a chance that it could prove to be wrong. So you try to logically analyze something, understand something. There is a chance that it could prove to be wrong at some point of time. That aspect of this Ritambhara-Prajna, this higher spiritual insight, or this ascent to higher consciousness, when we identify ourselves with the supreme, the true, the absolute, the ultimate insight into whatever we try to learn, or also into our own nature. How this intuition, this intuitive knowledge transcends, but doesn't conflict, but transcends, goes beyond epistemological tools, will be explained in the next sutra. So, in order to make you ready to understand this, I shall first try to explain what this means. So, when you read a book or when you learn a language, or you understand the meaning of a word, how do we understand? We use what is called the theory of knowledge. So in Vedanta and also in yoga, there are different epistemological tools. Technically, perception, inference, analogy, or it's called comparison, or verbal testimony, presumption, and non-cognition. These are the 6 tools. In Sanskrit we call pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, arthapatti, anupalabdhi. In yoga tradition, they accept only 3, sometimes some yoga philosophers, 4 epistemological tools. So those of you who are not familiar with philosophy and this subject, I would say few things. First, epistemology is the branch of philosophy which deals with theory of knowledge. How do we understand things? You directly perceive. It's called direct perception. It's called pratyaksha. In Sanskrit, the word the word explains what it means. Pratyaksha, aksha means eyes. Prati means within the realm of eyes. So whatever you pursue with your mind and eyes, you see a visual object. It also implies indirectly whatever you pursue with other senses of perception and mind. You hear using mind and the sense of hearing. You smell using the mind and sense of smell. You taste, you use the sense of taste and mind. All these are these 5 senses of perception and mind together perceive things. Now, through these epistemological tools, which Sanskrit called pramana shastra, is the authentic way of understanding, perceiving, cognizing, or analyzing, internalizing things. So normally, in normal human life, when you try to understand, it's a basic principle in education psychology. When you try to understand something new, you try to understand this new idea by associating it with you already know. So the association with what you know, with what you are going to learn, that is the natural logic of human perception and analysis. But there is always a problem. Anything that you understand through logical analysis may prove to be wrong for another person, another place, maybe for years at another point of time. What you consider to be right now, you may not consider to be right maybe after some years. So when you read some Greek classics or scriptures, Bible, Gita, anything you find, what you learn today may prove to be just partial or incomplete in comparison with what you may learn after some time. So as we evolve, our understanding of what we learn also evolves. It becomes more and more complete. Which means anything that you pursue using theory of knowledge, the tools of perception or cognition, cannot be absolutely real. Can prove to be less real or somewhat incomplete at some other point of time. But what you learn through Ritambhara-Prajna, what we call this higher spiritual intuition, it never goes wrong. Because you are perceiving things not using human logical tools, but there is a higher spiritual power. It can be called spiritual power, but don't misunderstand, it is nothing occult. One very important principle of yoga psychology is there is nothing like occult. Occult is unreal. Yoga says everything is logical. What you cannot logically analyze today you consider to be occult or miraculous. There is no miracle in yoga. There is absolutely nothing occult in yoga. Everything is naturally, scientifically, logically analyzed. So, this Ritambhara-Prajna, Ritambhara-Prajna means when you reach this higher power of concentration without discrimination, without any kind of division, then mind becomes pure, it gets fixed. That's the earlier sutra which we already discussed elaborately. The 48th sutra which we discussed just now is Ritambhara-Prajna. At that point, your knowledge or also your tool that you use for getting that knowledge becomes filled with truth, means filled with insight. The whole reality is revealed to you. So this, at the yoga point of view, what happens when through yogic practice of meditation, concentration, when you reach this higher level of logical analysis, psychological purity, what happens? You develop this skill into go directly into anything you want to learn, and the whole picture of what you want to learn is revealed. So, not in parts. A scientist can reveal only a fraction of the secret of nature. That's why scientific discoveries go through different paradigms, paradigm shift in modern physics. A number of discoveries together for a fixed period of time, they constitute one paradigm. And maybe after 20 years, a new paradigm may come into existence. So, but this kind of paradigm shift doesn't happen in the practice of yoga. The whole truth is revealed. Well, the classic example we can find historically is Buddha's enlightenment. Of course, it is found in the life of other spiritual teachers also, like Shankaracharya, Sri Ramakrishna. Maybe this is what Bible, in its own language, try to explain in the context of Jesus' prayer, his dependence, his tests and trials, and what really happened to him during the 18 years of his unknown life, culmination. So in Buddha's case, it's very classical, very historically recorded. Buddha meditated for a long time, and finally we say he got enlightenment. The Buddha, it means the enlightened one. So what was this enlightenment? This enlightenment was a new addition of knowledge or information. Rather, his mind ascended to this higher level of Ritambhara-Prajna. And this particular state of concentration is technically called in yoga tradition called samapatti. It is different from the early stages. It is not the result of mere concentration or samadhi. It is the result of samapatti, it is called. Now, next sutra further explains this, and I shall try to explain this in the context of traditional commentaries and also Swami Vivekananda's modern interpretation. So the next sutra is this: Sutta Anumana Prajnabhyam Anya Vishaya Vishesharthatvad. This is the sutra. So what it means is the reality revealed through this higher intuition called Ritambhara-Prajna is different from the knowledge you get through two pramanas. Names are mentioned here, Sruta and Anumana. Sruta means Shabda Pramana, verbal testimony. Books that we consider to be, or to contain, we consider those books contain certain revealed truths, and we take for granted they're all real. It is called Shabda Pramana, verbal testimony. Every religious tradition, and also in modern science also has got verbal testimony. With the works of Einstein is verbal testimony, because verbal testimony means testimony, record, or recording of events or discoveries, revelations that happen to a spiritual person in his spiritual life. The discoveries of great scientists are also like verbal testimony. They experienced those scientific discoveries doing their experiments, investigations, when they hit at the doors of nature with a sledgehammer. The doors revealed, opened. And we call it a discovery or an invention, whatever it may be. So they also constitute verbal testimony. So Sutta Anumana. Anumana means inference. Inference also one of the tools according to Aristotle, according to old Greek logic also. It's a very important tool of epistemology, or theory of knowledge, inference. When you try to infer, when you use the word inference, you always refer to a previous experience you had. The classical example in Hindu Vedantic tradition of inference is, see, when you see smoke on the mountain, then you come to a conclusion there should be fire. Because every time when you saw smoke, it always was associated with fire. So a previous experience is referred to, and you come to a conclusion that if there is smoke on the mountain, there should be some kind of wild forest fire or something. This is another example of Anumana. So what Patanjali says is, Sutta Anumana Bhyam Anya Vishaya Vishesharthatvad. So this knowledge, the knowledge that you get through Ritambhara-Prajna, this higher intuition, is totally different from what you get from verbal testimony, books, or logical analysis. Because from logical analysis, from books that explain things that happen to others, which is an indirect way of understanding, of course, there is always a basis of perception at the empirical level. And whatever you pursue at the empirical level, as I mentioned earlier, is only part of the truth. The whole reality doesn't reveal itself unless you ascend, you go beyond the empirical level. When you develop these higher mental faculties, which can penetrate through the outer layers of whatever subject, whatever it is, and go straight to the truth. That from the samadhi just mentioned is of a much higher order, because it can penetrate through certain realms, certain outer regions, which cannot be revealed through logical analysis. Now here I should quote one famous commentator. His name is Bhoja. He was a king who wrote a famous book. He's called Raja Martanda. And he's another well-known book. He is called Bhoja Vritti. He was an emperor who wrote a famous commentary to Yoga Sutra. It's called Raja Martanda. So he says, what is this Ritambhara-Prajna? Asyam hi prajnayam sukshma vyavakita viprakrishtanam api visheshaha Ritam avigalpidam satyamidiyavat sputena rupena bhasade kadachidapi na vibirriyena achadide sa Ritambhara-Prajna is a definition of this higher intuition. So one interesting aspect of this is, when you understand, when you evolve yourself to this higher spiritual intuition, and when you understand, when you learn something, you get an inner conviction that this is true. Satyamidiyavat. There is absolutely no doubt. Doubts will vanish only, even doubts will permanently vanish only when we reach this higher level of intuition. Other times, doubts may disappear for some time, but they reappear. Absolute conviction, we cannot even call it a conviction. It is a kind of experience where doubts can no longer exist and doubts cannot return to your mind. So that level of higher intuition, Ritam avikalpidam satyamidi yavat. There cannot be any kind of vikalpa or error or ignorance. Vipragishtanam api visheshakha. So, kadachidapi na vipariyena achadide. It's never covered with any kind of doubt or skepticism. So, skepticism can be totally and completely transcended only when we ascend beyond this lower empirical understanding or cognition or perception using tools of epistemology, tools of theory of knowledge. To fully understand what this implies, I shall try to explain what this really means. What is meant by transcending the level of logical perception? As I mentioned, logical perception. And also when we go to schools, when we learn things, we always use certain tools for understanding. These tools are called in Sanskrit pramana. There is a whole science of it. It's called pramana shastram. But in English, the equivalent may be roughly, it is called epistemology. It is not an ontological, metaphysical analysis, but the ontological ideas are analyzed in the light of epistemological tools. So in Indian philosophy, there is a very elaborate epistemology. This may appear to be a bit boring, a bit doctrinal, but it may be, you can give an idea of the grandeur of this ancient way of analyzing. In fact, I had to remember, these epistemological tools were first recorded in books written maybe around 1800 BC. Gautama Nyaya. Gautama is the exponent of the ancient Indian logical system. It's called Sutra. He wrote the Sutras. Later, Vatsyayan and others developed Dignaga. 3 periods of Indian logical evolution is there. It's called the old Nyaya, Madhyama Nyaya, and Navya Nyaya, for 3 schools, depending upon the periodical evolution. So what are these tools? The first one I mentioned, pratyaksha. So I can see the chair in front of me. I can see the chair using my mind and my eyes. I can hear the sound coming from the street using my ears, my sense of hearing and my mind coming together. If mind alone is there, if I am deaf, I can't hear. If my mind is not there, even then also I can't hear. So mind and senses of perception should come together. So pratyaksha means not only eyes, all the 5 senses and mind coming together. The second one is anumana, it's called inference. Inference, if we all know, Aristotle, Greek logicians and Christian theology, they all used inference. The third is analogy or comparison. I mean, you go to a forest or you go to a zoo, you see an animal, and that animal resembles some other animal you have seen earlier. You come to a conclusion that they belong to the same category. Some comparison, similarity. The fourth one is verbal testimony. Verbal testimony has its advantages and also disadvantages. The advantage is verbal testimony or shabda pramana, called shabdam or shabda pramana. It is a record of experiences of great saints and sages and philosophers. It is not revealed, that's a very important thing. It is not revealed coming from air. Or it's not that somebody coming and telling you, you assume you heard. No. It is something they have themselves experienced. And that's the value of verbal testimony. But it is their experience, not your experience. So Indian philosophy tells you, unless it becomes your experience, verbal testimony also of secondary importance. Somebody tells you there is a place called Siberia, which they show you a map, but that's not your experience. So you read about in books. It's also indirect. And the fifth one is arthapatti. It is called circumstantial assumption or presumption, implication, whatever. The classical example is a gentleman, he says he doesn't eat any food at daytime, but he's getting fatter and fatter, getting cholesterol and diabetes and can't walk properly, which means he's eating all the time at night. It's called arthapatti. It's called implication, it's called. So it is called a circumstantial implication. And the sixth one is unavailable. The non-cognition also is a source of knowledge. You come to know the fact it is not there. That is also an information. And the seventh one is gesture or cheshta. Somebody stretches out his hand and he looks a bit hungry. It means he's asking for food. It is one. And then you hearsay, aitihya. And some even you have seen, sambhava. Another one is induction, which was used by Sherlock Holmes, if you're familiar with. It's kind of reductionism or it's called induction. You just eliminate all other possibilities and eventually focus on the one logical possibility. It is called induction or reductionism. Anyway, these are 10 tools. All these are not so very distinct. So Vedanta normally accepts 6 important tools, and Yoga and Sankhya system sometimes 3, sometimes 4. Now, now we come to the importance of this Ritambhara-Prajna. There are certain higher truths which we can only experience at the deeper level of our own being. And once we get that knowledge can never be disproved. Your conviction can never be shaken. And you know that 1,000 people, 1,000 books, 1,000 logicians may try to disprove it, but your conviction is not shaken. Vedanta tells you that unless you have little bit of this, our internal notes never get broken. Skepticism, doubts, inability to accept even though you know it for real, and a tendency to accept what is false, though you know it is false, and an inability, total incapacity to accept something which you know actually to be real, but still you cannot do that. So these are called notes. All these skepticism, doubts, internal conflicts will be completely eliminated when you get this higher intuitive conviction or understanding of our true nature. That is called Ritambhara-Prajna. Now, I would like to read this in the light of Swami Vivekananda's interpretation. The reason why Swamiji's interpretation is so very relevant to our times is Swami Vivekananda, he based his views on the fundamental traditional scriptures, especially Vyasa's commentary and Bhoja's vritti, but at the same time he gave a very modern interpretation. So Swami Vivekananda says, the knowledge that is gained from testimony and inference is about common objects. That from samadhi or Ritambhara-Prajna is of a much higher order, being able to penetrate where inference and testimony cannot go. It means it is an unerring knowledge, something that you know to be real, which cannot be shaken. The idea is that we have to get our knowledge of ordinary subjects through direct perception, seeing, hearing, etc. And by inference therefrom. Inference is related to perception. And from testimony of people who are competent. If a scientist tells you something on science, if an engineer says something about engineering, or a musician says something about music, you consider their views to be authentic. It's called verbal testimony. In spiritual life, there are those who speak of these higher truths based on their own experiences, so their words become authentic. By people who are competent, the yogis always mean the Rishis, or the seers of the thoughts recorded in the scriptures, the Vedas. So the word Rishi is used here. That's what Vivekananda, there's a term he uses, Rishi, which is in Sanskrit word, which means a person who can go deeper, who can see into things in their true nature. Kranta Darshina, I mean they can farsight, insight together. They can have an insight into everything and they have farsight into everything. So the Kranta Darshi is called Rishi. So their words are considered to be authentic. According to them, the only proof of the scriptures is that they were testimony of competent persons, yet they say scriptures cannot take us to realization. It's a very, very important point to remember. Books, philosophers, and scriptures cannot take you to your own experience, but they can help you to remove some of the obstacles in the form of conflicts, skepticism, or doubts. They can help you to remove them. But the spiritual journey is our own responsibility. We have to do we have to do our own pilgrimage. So that's an important point to remember. So you can see this higher conception. Books are important, but books only help you to remove ignorance. Light helps you to remove darkness. This is often explained in the light of one famous analogy which you may be familiar with, the rope-snake analogy. In a dark room, there is not enough light, so there is something curved that lies on the floor, which is somewhat dark in color. One may mistake that actually is a piece of rope, which you may mistake to be a snake. You may mistake it for a snake or a curved stick or a thin stream of water, or maybe a crack on the floor. There are different ways of misunderstanding this dark snake lying in a semi-dark room because there is not enough light. When you bring light, when you open the doors and windows, you understand it is not a snake or a curved stick. It is a piece of rope. Now is the important point, remember. The light doesn't reveal the snake. The light doesn't reveal the rope. So what does the light do? The light drives away darkness and brings enough light. So darkness was the obstacle that stood in your way of understanding that it is a piece of rope, which led to the misunderstanding that it was a snake. So when you bring light, what happens? The obstacle in the form of darkness is removed. When the obstacle is removed, then the rope is self-revealed. That is the role of scriptures in Vedanta and Yoga. So very often, scriptures are taken to be a substitute for our own experience. Vedanta doesn't accept that. Yoga also doesn't accept that. Yoga tells you, Vedanta, Yoga, most of these theistic Indian systems of philosophy, with the Purvamimamsa or Uttaramimamsa, it is Vedanta, Nyaya, Vaisheshika and Sankhya Yoga, all the 6 systems. Also Buddhist scriptures also, Sautrantika, Vaibhashika, Vijnanavada, Shunyavada, all the 4 important schools of Buddhist philosophy. They also give only a very logical place to scriptures. A word itself doesn't become a substitute for our own spiritual experience. That's why there is a lot of conflict and fanaticism in the name of word, written word or spoken word. But that's why Shankaracharya, the greatest of Advaita, says Shastram tu ajnana nivartakam na jnana pravartakam, means scriptures, verbal testimony removes wrong notions from our mind. The right notions will be the natural result, consequence that happens when the wrong notion is removed. When darkness is driven out, what remains is light. So that's an important point, remember. Of course, yoga commentators like Vyasa, Shankaracharya who wrote Vyasa Bhashi Vivarana, they make a very important point in this context. That's very, very important. That is, whom do we consider to be authentic? And that's an important point. Whom do we consider? Authentic in the sense, Shabda Pramana means verbal testimony. Verbal testimony is helpful to remove our wrong notions. But what kind of verbal testimony? Whose books do we consider to be authentic? So Shankaracharya says, Asampradaya vid sarvashastra vidavi murkhavadeva upekshaneha. He makes a point. Now anyone can read any book, really speaking. Anyone can read any book and delude himself or herself into thinking that he has understood the truth. But we don't accept that in the empirical realm. See, anyone who reads a book on engineering, we won't consider, we won't enter into a contract with him to build a home. He should have a degree from an engineering school. Anyone who has read one book on medicine, you won't put your life into his hands unless you want to die. So also any area, even cutting your hair, you should go to a school and learn hair cutting. Then only you will take the risk of putting your hair in his hands. Otherwise you won't be able to walk outside in the street. But in spiritual realm, we consider anyone can say anything. Shankaracharya says that's not true. Just as you go to an engineering school to learn engineering, so you go to medical school to become a surgeon. So also you should learn this Shastra from somebody who has learned from another teacher, who should be a person who has learned from his teacher, just like going to engineering school or medical school. So that's a very, very important point to be remembered when we talk about Shabda Pramana. That is the view of both the 3 schools of Nyaya, I mean the Pauranika Nyaya, Madhyamika Nyaya, Navya Nyaya, schools of Vedantins and yoga philosophers. That means authenticity doesn't come from theoretical understanding. So even in ordinary computer science, you have got passwords. If there is one difference, one letter or one figure, it doesn't open. So even in scriptural studies, traditionally, there are passwords, which in Indian tradition have been handed over for the last 3,000 years. According to historical records, we have maybe more than 3,000 years, we have a Guru, Shishya, Prachishya Parampara, a succession of teachers, students, and their students, and their students. At least for the last, according to modern historians, we have this recorded tradition of what you call sampradaya of teachers. Then only it becomes authentic. So then only it is considered to be verbal testimony or Shabda Pramana. So we can read all the Vedas, yet will not realize anything. But when we practice the teachings, then we attain to that state which realizes what the scriptures talk about. which penetrates where neither reason nor perception nor inference can go. Swamiji is talking about Ritambhara-Prajna, which is under discussion now, and where the testimony of others cannot avail. So again, testimony is important, Shabda Pramana, verbal testimony is important, but even though it cannot substitute for our own spiritual experience, Shabda Pramanas can help you how to undertake this pilgrimage for our own progress, but it cannot do the journey, the traveling on our behalf. But even those Shabda Pramanas should be accepted only when it is authentic, and authenticity in theistic tradition comes from teacher-student succession. That is a very, very important point to be remembered in this context. So Vivekananda continues, realization is real religion, all the rest is only preparation. So that's the only way to get this real knowledge. We mentioned, asyam hi prajnayam sukshma vyavahita viprakrishtanam api visheshaha. Ritam avigalpidam satyamidiyava. Ritam is, what Ritam? Ritam in Rig Veda, Ritam is a very interesting and very profound word. Ritam, Satyam and Dharma. These three terms are used in the Vedic literature with a very profound implication. Satyam, it is a philosophical analysis of the supreme reality. Dharma is the practical aspect of practicing that dharma, the applied aspect of dharma. Ritam is something much more profound. Ritam is the invisible, the internal link that harmonizes everything in this world. There's an invisible thread that harmonizes, that puts together in a single logical wheel of consequence. For example, anything that upsets nature, anything, for example, you cut down trees, for example. Well, you are actually disturbing the rhythm of this invisible interrelatedness, the invisible interconnecting link that preserves balance in nature. It can cause reduction in the rainfall, can cause famine and floods. All can happen if you destroy trees and forests. It can cause climate change, many things. So this action becomes adharma because you violate Ritam. So Ritam is the supreme truth. So Ritambhara-Prajna means one who has identified himself with this interlinking, interrelatedness, the invisible harmonizing link that puts everything together. That happens only when we take up our own spiritual journey. Intellectual ascent and intellectual descent do not constitute yoga. So, frequently, when we read a book and when we are drawn towards a great idea, when we develop a great liking for that idea, we sometimes delude ourselves into thinking that we have reached that experience, forgetting the fact that it still remains a concept or an idea. An idea or a concept or a doctrine is a remote phenomenon. There is still a long distance to travel before we reach that idea in our own spiritual journey. When we experience, then only the distance is covered. But very often, what happens is, when we feel a great attraction for an idea, and we try to internalize that idea, we start talking about that idea, writing about it, we often delude ourselves into thinking that that idea has become a matter of our own experience. So that's why this idea, this warning is given in Shankaracharya's Vyasa Bhashi Vivarana. Swamiji puts in his own unique style. So Swamiji says, intellectual assent and intellectual dissent do not constitute yoga or religion. The central idea of the yogis is that just as we come in direct contact with objects of the senses, so religion even can be directly perceived in a far more intense sense. So often religion is considered to be something remote. But actually, when we reach the experience level, you find the truth that the truth is closer to us than anything at the empirical level. So in Vedanta, it's called Yat Sakshat Aparokshat Brahma. When we realize this truth, we come to the experience that we are non-different from that truth. But it cannot be perceived at the empirical level. So we may assume that it is indirect. It is called paroksha. It is not pratyaksha in the sense that we can directly perceive it, the way we perceive heat and cold. So we may dismiss the idea it is something remote. But actually, it is not direct, but it is certainly not remote. So Vedantic philosophers come out with this word, Yat Sakshat Aparokshat Brahma. It means it is non-remote. They don't say it is direct, because if you use the word direct, it could imply that you can perceive Atman or true nature, this Ritambhara-Prajna, the way we perceive things using our senses of perception. It cannot be perceived like that. It is something that we experience in our own inner spiritual journey. Once we reach that level, then whatever we do, whatever we try to understand, we get this unique insight into things. A fragment of this insight you find among great poets, writers, musicians, intellectuals, creative writers, but then it is only a flash. They don't reach the experience level. They get just a flash of this. I refer to this phenomena happening. You find in the great works of Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, the Grand Inquisitor, or the great poems, Valmiki, or you find many unique, great universal truths being spoken by characters in creative writings, because the authors have a fragment, a fraction of this insight. But that's not a yogic insight. It doesn't transform their life, but still through constant concentration, focusing their mental energies in one area gives you this ability to go deeper into whatever you are doing, writing, thinking. Anyway, so this is an ongoing program, so we will have interaction now for about 10 minutes. Then we will continue this class next week. Okay, thank you. We can, if there are questions, you are most welcome.
What are the common things that take our focus away from the single pointedness, the focus of our spiritual life?
Yeah, all the five senses.
Of course.
Drag your mind in 5 different directions every day, every moment.
I know, every second.
Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah.
What is the method for?
The first method is to try to evolve a counter focus for the senses. It's better to do something good all the time, to think something good, to visualize something good, to hear something good. That will create a healthy counter focus. That may not enable you to focus your mind on the higher reality, but it will help you to focus your mind away from unreal things, from harmful, negative focuses. So the first principle in all traditions is we cannot just ask your eye, don't see anything, then the eyes will be seeing that only. Even you keep your eyes closed, your eyes will be focusing on that visual object which you ask your eyes not to see. So internal mental seeing is not different from external outer seeing. So what we normally should do is to create a counter focus, a focus that's healthier. So that's the role of scriptures. In fact, even an intellectual interest in scriptures will keep a person busy. His energies, his nervous energy, intellectual energy, emotional energy, all can be diverted towards a healthy focus. That's first step. When that process deepens, then mind will automatically get focused on something positive and less focused on something negative. Right.
Swami, what is the true nature of doubt? Is doubt part of the gunas, part of the Thomistic? Is doubt Thomistic? Doubt.
Yes. Doubt has got two important dimensions. One, it is a very positive, very healthy, very helpful. It's a guide. But sometimes it can be a deceiving mechanism. Sometimes what happens, when it's like a wheel or like a straight line. If it is healthy doubt, it's like a straight line. It comes to an end. But if it's a wheel, it never comes to an end. So frequently, very often what happens, our mind could play a trick with us. So we may go on asking doubts without this direction. So doubt can be a very healthy guide, a great helpmate. It can assist you because healthy doubts, without being, not skepticism, but doubt actually, will prompt us to go on making inquiries. It will keep the mind engaged on what it is doubtful about. So that could help us to go deeper and deeper into this. Doubt can be a great friend and philosopher and guide. The other doubt is a deceiving mechanism. It goes on rotating. There are many people who don't really want a conclusion. They have doubts, but they don't want an answer. So that could be a very dangerous thing. And it could even degenerate into a kind of intellectual conceit or intellectual arrogance without our being aware of it. But once we can turn our doubt into a straight line, then great philosopher in any area.
Swami, how do you focus? Thank you. Let's say we are trying really hard to keep the mind on this good thing and not be distracted by the lower thoughts, right? But you're really mad, or you're really frustrated, or, you're really caught up in the whirlwind of emotion. How do you bring the focus back when you're so caught up? It's just, you're trying, but you can't achieve pulling yourself away.
Yeah, you use the word you're mad, they say mad. Now that implies energy, enthusiasm. You want to do something. So people who have got a lot of conflicts, I'm not talking about bipolar, I'm not talking about manic depressive, I'm not talking about manic problem. I'm talking about normal human beings who have got a lot of conflicts will have this energy, enthusiasm. That can be diverted to something creative. So whatever resources we have, Even restlessness can be given a healthy direction. Do something good, read something wonderful. So any manifestation of human energy, enthusiasm, creative energy can be diverted to something spiritually soothing, anything that gives us a feeling of inner contentment or happiness. That's the first step. I'm talking about people who have a lot of conflicts. So one way is these conflicts naturally involve great exuberance sometimes, kind of a tendency, to be active in one way or other. So that tendency can be given a healthy direction. That's the step number one. Once we get it, once we engage ourselves in some positive actions, good thoughts, good ideas, then that will create in spiritual asset, spiritual vrittis, vasanas, impressions, samskaras we call. So once our mind is filled with impressions and samskaras and vrittis generated from good actions, good words, good thoughts, then mind will become more and more calm and quiet. Conflicts will decrease. Yeah.
Hi, Swami. I have a clarification based on what you mentioned today. So, is it true that the reading of scriptures and then the subsequent experience, the personal experience that you gain from it, is a pathway to getting into the higher state of intuition? Or are we saying that this reading of scriptures is not necessary to get to the higher level of my question is reading of scriptures a foundation to get to the next state of experience, which gets to the next state of intuition?
Yeah. We at the beginning of a spiritual life, our mind will be full of ideas, memories, impressions, emotions, attitudes. All of them may not be helpful. Some of them may be helpful. Some of them may not be helpful. So we feel conflict between healthy, favorable, spiritually desirable ideas and spiritually undesirable ideas, conflict. So at the first step, we must increase the store of spiritually desirable, healthy ideas. How do we do that? Through good actions, good deeds, and feeding our mind with good ideas, good concepts. What you feed your mind with, that will determine how your mind functions. This body falls sick if you eat bad food. Mind also will fall sick when you feed your mind with unhealthy mental food. And food for the mind is thoughts. Where do we get good thoughts? Associating with people with good thoughts. So if you have years of a spiritual inclination, a higher inclination, then you feel at home in the company of people of the same temperament. But if you meet the wrong type of person, you feel a kind of conflict. So also books, scriptures are a great storehouse of healthy food for the mind. That's an important point to remember. So scriptures are a great storehouse for healthy food for the mind. It could be anything, any scripture, world scripture. This is Bible, Bhagavad Gita, Dhammapadas, any of the great teachings you find. Wherever you find highly edifying, sublime ideas, that is good food for the mind. So if you nourish your mind with good food, then mind also becomes good, healthy mind. And remember, healthy mind is closely linked to health, spiritual health. Really speaking, psychological problems can never have permanent solutions at psychological level. Every treatment, as any serious psychiatrist will admit, is an attempt to reduce symptoms, postpone problems, reduce the intensity, which may return even greater intensity. But if you can ascend, go beyond your own mind, and if you can identify yourself as something other than this mind which naturally gets disturbed, the Atman, we call it Atman, in all tradition we are called. Then you find mind becomes steady, calm and quiet. So that's the best way of feeding the mind with spiritual food. And spiritual food you get in the great holy scriptures of all traditions. Not only from traditions that talk about a God, not always in fact, but even say Buddha did not affirm the existence of a creator God. But Buddha's teachings are full of great spiritual truths. So you should think of spirituality as something that goes far beyond the conventional understanding of religion and theological systems. Okay? So I think we will have, right now we will conclude and we'll continue the session next week. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.